So how can tariffs benefit middle-class people like you and like me? Well, there's actually a number of ways that it can benefit you and me, whether you live in Europe or the United States.
Some might say it's economic nationalism. I call it common sense.
And it just seems that the media doesn't want to discuss these ideas because they're anti-globalist.
Trump just likes the attention, just likes the drama.
I don't think there's a genuine economic strategy behind it.
You have to keep in mind there's an elite class out there have other plans for your future and my future that are not in our best interest. So just keep that in mind. So how can it benefit us? Well, first off, tariffs can actually create jobs. Job creation, just think of that. Isn't that a novel idea? And it can increase our wages. Ooh, so that means we have more disposable income for us to spend. Not for the politicians, not for the technocrats, right? Because they think they can spend money better than we can. They think they're smarter than us. And in most cases, they just got in those jobs because they were either born in the right family or they were just lucky enough to meet the right person to get into the situation. They're not necessarily actually that clever, that smart, or that intelligent in many cases. Actually, more and more I find that they're actually not very impressive at all. But anyway, just moving on. Number two, it can help with revenue redistribution, meaning that it can provide excess income tariffs where they can help support or offset burdened households or people who are financially struggling in certain sectors. So it helps in a way kind of redistribute wealth. So rather than that money going to perhaps another country in another sector, that money will stay right here in your country, benefiting its own citizens. That's a big plus. Now, tariffs have to be used intelligently. You don't just go off and just start tariffing everybody like a crazy man. But if they're used responsibly, intelligently, they can definitely benefit us. I mean, Europe uses them all the time against the United States, for example, and the tariffs are not even one for one. They're oftentimes quite skewed. So, but people don't like to discuss that, or they don't want to recognize that because, of course, they have a trade advantage there that I don't know why people have allowed that to happen, but they have. The next thing is it provides strategic protection. That's what I'm saying about using tariffs in a smart way. Strategic protection, meaning you can protect certain industries that you need to protect. For example, you want to protect always your agriculture, your energy, because if you got into a war or into a bad situation, you want to be able to protect your own food supply, you want to protect your own energy supply, and you want to be able to take care of your own medical needs for your citizens. Those three areas, so pharmaceutical, agricultural, and energy, you want those to be domestically handled. What are the challenges that tariffs can afford us? Well, tariffs, one thing that they can do is they can raise prices one time. They don't create inflation, but they do create an increase in price for imported goods. So that means if we're importing, I'm going to use a bottle of wine from the United States, and now it costs me 3 times what it used to cost, well, there's a price adjustment there, right? So what happens is I have a choice. Either I can buy that American bottle of wine, or I can buy a national bottle of wine, a French bottle of wine, or Spanish bottle of wine, or whatever, at a lower price. When I lived in Brazil, prices of imported goods were extremely expensive. So what would I do? Well, I would buy national goods when at all possible. And most of the time, I would just find using their locally produced goods. So there is a way around it, and you can survive quite well. Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, Ecuador, Uruguay, Paraguay, they all highly tariff imported goods. And I've lived in, well, just Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia. And I can tell you from experience, I would just buy national goods. Once in a while, there would be a product that I would want and I would pay the excess. So you're not obligated to buy imported goods. So what's the deal about tariffs? And what it does is it makes national people manufacture and create their own products. Now, there's another challenge to it is long-term, it creates a problem with competitiveness. Because my market is being protected locally at a local level, eventually I'll become less competitive because I don't have to deal with the international markets. Again, tariffs I think are a great solution for a short-term period of maybe 5 years, 10 years. It's not a fix-all forever and ever, but it's definitely a way to kind of readjust the markets and get things back from such a globalistic sort of way, which things are skewed now because everything's being manufactured in Asia. Medicines, technology, everything, and very few things are being manufactured in the West. So we need to rebalance that, and tariffs is an excellent mechanism to rebalance that. And on top of it, it's going to benefit the middle class people like you and like me. Politicians like Ursula are not going to tell you that because it's not in their best interest. They're globalists. They're members of the Bilderberg. They're members of the World Economic Forum. That's a fact, what I'm saying. So they have another agenda. They see the world as a one world government, globalist government. If you think that things are screwed up now, just think if we had a one world government. You want to talk about a mess? Oh my God. Let's make Europe great again. Moving on. So let's look at some European countries that benefited from high tariffs historically. If you want to know the future, then study the past. If you want to know the future, study history. History will tell you what will happen tomorrow. So the first country, Germany, in the 19th century, under Bismarck, benefited tremendously from tariffs. And that's a fact, both in 1834 and 1879 to be exact. Then we have Italy, 1800s, and the 1887. they had the Tariff Reform Act. And the middle class benefited tremendously by the industrial base being built in northern Lombardy, up in Milan, in that area of Italy. And farmers in southern Italy were shielded from competitiveness from other countries. So it benefited the farmers in Italy, and it benefited the industrialization of northern Italy, those tariffs. In Spain, they had protective tariffs also, all around the same time, 1891. And keep in mind, this is one of the richest periods for many countries at that time. Spain introduced high tariffs on imported goods such as textiles, steel, and machinery to support its own domestic industry, which what happened in the end, País Vasco and Catalonia have most of the heavy industry in Spain. And that all started during this period of time and then was developed further under Francisco Franco, the famous dictator in Spain. And on top of it, tariffs helped Spain retain a certain level of economic independence from other countries in Europe that were more industrialized and ahead of Spain at the time. So you can see there is a benefit. The United Kingdom, 1900s as well, 1815 to 1846, used tariffs as well successfully, and eventually they did repeal the tariffs. France in the 19th century benefited from tariffs. First with Napoleon Bonaparte, then under Napoleon III. By the way, did you hear Napoleon Bonaparte's private car on sale somewhere? Check out this video clip. Not only that, tariffs benefited the expansion of the middle class in France. And one last time to make sure you get this, drive this home. Tariffs benefited the expansion, getting bigger, of the middle class in France. Further, the tariffs in France benefited the French farmer in the 19th century. In modern times, the European Union common external tariffs, meaning the EU uses tariffs to protect its own industries. And that's where they're getting into it with Donald Trump, I believe, and they're having some tension there because they don't feel it's fair for Trump to tariff them the same rate that they tariff the United States. So if we look at the farmers all in France, Spain, and Italy, they all benefited from tariffs. Manufacturing countries like Germany also benefit from tariffs. So I guess it would be fair to talk about what countries would be vulnerable to higher trade tariffs. Well, basically countries that are low on the competitiveness, meaning that they're less productive, they're not very competitive, they tend to be overly bureaucratic, a lot of red tape, it's hard to do business there. Countries like this would be included like a Spain, a Portugal, sometimes in Italy would be included, a Greece, Brazil for sure, Colombia, where they complicate doing business. So that makes reduction on competitiveness. On top of it, corruption is another big factor why countries are not as competitive as other countries. In fact, it has a major impact on why some countries do well and other countries do not do as well. Corruption. The other thing to look at is countries that are highly dependent on exports, of course, like Saudi Arabia as an example. If suddenly you were to tariff the hell out of their oil, well, now their oil becomes more expensive on the world stage to sell, and therefore their exports would go down and then their economy would suffer because they rely on one exclusive commodity to export. But assuming that you have multiple products that you can export, you should be in good shape. Now, what happens to a country that has limited supply chains, like we are in Europe, that we're overly reliant on Asia for the import of our goods? In this case, that tariffs may not be exactly the best thing for us, and we need to become a little bit more independent, especially in key sectors. So we want to increase our trade diversification to limit the negative effects that tariffs could have on our economy. Export-driven economies, for example, in Saudi Arabia, over-reliance on key industries can also affect. Tariffs also can damage a country if it's a small little country, and now they're trying to have a trade war with a much bigger, stronger economy. That would be an unfair fight. But then again, that smaller country needs to find a way to work around those tariffs or work an arrangement with that bigger economy to find an equitable solution for both people. Most of the time, the big economies don't want to slam and destroy the other countries. They just want to make sure that they're getting a fair trade thing. And if you look what Trump's doing, he's not going after like Uganda with tariffs. He's going after the EU. He's going after Canada, Mexico, and major players, China. These are countries that can withstand a little bit of tension and friction in their economies. So tariffs necessarily are a good thing, I believe, short term, if used wisely and used intelligently, applied intelligently. They would be detrimental long term if they're overused or kept in place for extensive periods of time. I think probably 5 to 10 years is enough time to help rebalance things with the tariffs because of the competitive factor as well. When sectors become overly confident that they have the business because they're protected by their domestic economies, they become less competitive. We know that. You can see this material. You can click the link below and get more insight like this in Rumble, and follow us on Rumble and learn more why tariffs can benefit you or harm you and how they will affect you, the middle class. It's not necessarily a great thing for the rich people and the billionaires, but it's a damn good thing for those of us who work for a living and the middle class. God bless you. Business leaders, for more value like this, follow me.